Fish Tales by Lynn, Yvonne, published by Indigner House, December 2020. Dedicated to my daughter, Andrea Marie, a hopeless romantic. There are only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle. Albert Einstein. One, after death. Embracing my ultimate dilemma, I challenged the question that rambled through my somewhat scattered brain. Do I drop to my knees and mourn for my innocent beauty, or do I run and call out for help? To this day, I still ask myself that one simple question: what do I do? It was the finality of her death that frightened me more than her lifeless body. Lying motionless atop the wooden slats of my private dock, Dru felt cold to the touch. No longer was she my enduring love. The witness to this tragic event was an old oak tree that shaded her from a warm November sun. The safe world I once knew had just transformed me into a toxic mix of twisted emotions, mutating my age from 18 to 74 within a single heartbeat. Instead of a vibrant teen, my body now housed an old and saddened soul. As they did not possess the strength or the courage, my hands refused to move. Instead, they remained motionless between the thin layers of my back pockets. Also, under these layers hid my confusion and fear. Maybe I was afraid that all of this was a nightmare I'd never wake up from, or maybe I was afraid of the unknown. To be perfectly honest with myself, I was simply afraid of life, of continuing to breathe without her by my side. Dru's death pushed me into a reality I didn't recognize, a world where I found myself buried beneath an unfamiliar realm that unfortunately would one day become my comfort zone. As for now, the truth was a silent place where I hid myself from everyone, including me. Dru's beauty still radiated around me. I could feel it, almost touch it. Her bloodshot eyes stared directly into the endless sky, a gaze that emitted a dread so powerful that the clouds fragmented, giving her passage to the heavens. Glancing up, I could almost make out the divine stairs she climbed when she left this world. I followed the thin streaks of bloody tears that now stained her rosy cheeks. Aside from the hideous, thick rope bruising her precious neck, she resembled a goddess, my goddess, from a far away exotic island. Everyone called her Dru. They said she was evil, that her wickedness planted a curse that ultimately destroyed her family. Rumors abound about how she was a burden to her grandfather, and that he too would one day perish from her malevolent spell. Their evidence? His deep love and devotion for her. According to my high school's faculty, her very presence was a liability. Sounded as if they were talking about a defective piece of equipment or a damaged toy, not my precious Dru. Others avoided her. I, however, admired her for her loveliness and internal spunk that lit up the world. To me, she was someone special, someone who made me feel alive, giving me a reason to believe that the day was worth waking up for. Because of her, I enjoyed life, something that I would now fear. Her real name? Drusilla Ali Palakiko. Long brown hair swaying past her waist resembled a midnight shadow crashing against a distant seashore. Large eyes so dark that her pupils blended within the surrounding hue, making them seem even larger. Rosy lips and cheeks glistening against her naturally tanned skin emitted an innocence so pure that it instantly mesmerized me. Something about Dru felt foreign to most, because Dru demonstrated a transparency that separated her from the rest of us. It was this separation that people feared, the sensation of becoming something less when she was near. I met Dru on a hot September day just a little over a year ago. It was at that moment I experienced a subtle awakening where I sensed nothing was real and everything was pure bogus. similar to when reality and illusion collide, blending a world into an unrealistic and spontaneous data dump of flashes and sounds. Time slowed, turning my seconds into centuries and hours into eternity. That day, when I was a senior in high school, nothing was going as planned. It started as just another day when Dad called to announce he was laid over again. Refusing to accept life, including her maternal responsibilities, my mother notched it up a level with her drinking. That meant it was up to me to drag my little brother out of bed and scoot him off to school, which would make me late for my first class, which would make me late for my second, and so on and so on. At my high school, once a person challenged the scales of time, getting back on track was almost impossible. Not to mention the small fire that I started in the chemistry lab that afternoon. On the brink of imploding or exploding, depending on how I looked at it, I darted from the classroom wishing I were any place else but there. "Your parents will pay for this one, Mr. Hartfield," Mr. Anderson, my science instructor, yelled out as I hurried past. I only mouthed the words, however, he still heard the F.U. loud and clear. "And add a week's detention for those kind words," he replied. The asshole probably had X-ray vision or an extra set of eyes in the back of his head. Wouldn't surprise me if he did. After all, my school was the institution from hell. Private and prestigious Charleston Hall was where every parent dreamed of placing their child, and every child dreaded the day. Uniforms that clung to our bodies as if made from sap restricted not only our movements, but sucked out our life's essence. A tie, doubling as a noose in case things got too tough, seemed to be the only redeeming features. And the shoes, slabs of leather that pinched with every step. I blew in through the office door just as she strolled out. A light whiff of jasmine hit me just as hard as a slap to the face, and it could only have come from her. A mixture of wonder and amazement overwhelmed me. My head spun and my mind scrambled. "Excuse me," the exotic goddess whispered, scurrying past. "No," I said. "Excuse me. Allow me to get the door." "Thank you." A quick glance from her sophisticated eyes pierced through me just as a sunbeam pierced a glass window. Such an amazing sensation. Watching her prance down the school stairs and into the courtyard, I knew she had just penetrated deeply into my soul. I felt emptier the farther away she walked. Rebelling, I clung to the main door for support. "Really, Jarrod?" Jenny glared at me through thick, black-rimmed glasses. Her eyes narrowed as her frown grew. "You're in my way, asshole!" "Sorry." I backed away as a chilling pain sliced through my heart. That mysterious, exotic angel gave me a taste of something, and I could not afford to lose it. And I didn't even know what that something was. I panicked. I had to have that something back. She was now a part of me, and I didn't even know her name. Rubbing my hands against my legs didn't ease my tension. As the office door slammed, almost slicing Jenny into two, I stepped back into reality. "Jerk," Jenny muttered as she yanked open the door. "Jarrod?" The principal scowled as if ready to sentence me to a life of hard labor or something. "Mr. Anderson isn't happy with you." Folded arms always meant a sense of urgency and problems to come, and her arms were definitely folded. "What else is new?" I whispered as several students rushed past, shoving me against a wall. "We followed the directions, honestly, Mrs. Harrington. The glass tube just broke. Then our notes caught fire. Thank goodness Mr. Anderson put it out before the alarm sounded. My dad'll cover the cost. I doubt if there'll be any charges this time." Phew! The principal smiled. Maybe my life would be spared after all. "Here," she said. Accepting the folded paper that proved I'd visited the principal's office for my delinquent behavior, I nodded. "Appreciate it, ma'am. Be a little more careful, will you, Jarrod?" "Yes, ma'am." Wanting another glance of that flawless, exotic beauty, my feet slapped against the outside steps. Dodging the other students, I dashed through the courtyard. My excitement sunk faster than the Titanic when I saw the empty parking lot. I had missed her. Aiming for my truck, I shrugged. Tossing my book bag onto the back seat, I hopped in and started the engine. Again, her magnetic spirit filled my vision. Although just a passing memory, her beautiful eyes seemed to calm me. Then the questions without answers hit. Who was she? Where did she come from? Most important, why did she haunt me? I was acting like a complete idiot, very unlike me. As I slowed down at the main entrance, a loud and angry voice grabbed my attention. Across the street, an older-looking man wearing overalls and a red plaid shirt looked ready to explode. His shouts raised even the hair on my arms. His hand clasped onto something so tightly I could almost see his ghostly white knuckles. Long but thinning gray hair somewhat matched his long, straggly beard. Then I saw her, standing forlorn, head down, and hugging her books. She looked lost and alone. Wanting to rescue her from this evil man, I pulled into the next space. I couldn't resist her silent plea for help. Pretending to need a drink or something, I stepped out. Again, her innocence drew me in. She was the magnet, and I was nothing but a helpless shard of iron. I couldn't stop staring at her. As our gaze touched, a shock sizzled up my spine. Then her eyes spoke to me. "Stay out of it." "This is bullshit," the old man said. "You coming and going as you damn well please is going to stop, and it's going to stop." The dangling bell rattled when I pulled open the dirty glass door. Advertisements aged by years of neglect blocked my vision, shoving ancient products into my face. "Hey, Jarrod," Stephen said from behind the counter. "Hey," I replied. Stephen, an old acquaintance from school, always looked as if he needed a shower. A few years older than me, he never really acted his age. His long, oily blonde hair resembled a surfer's more than a store clerk's. Since the closest ocean was hundreds of miles away, Stephen looked out of place. My father would opine the boy was a waste of oxygen. "What's up?" Stephen asked. "Grabbing a drink." I placed the soda on the counter and dropped a couple of dollars on a faded advertisement for Camel cigarettes. I frowned. "What's going on out there?" "New family in town." Picking up the money, Stephen glanced outside. "Moved in a few weeks ago. Got money. Never know it by the way they dress." I laughed. One would never know by just looking at Stephen that his parents paid for an expensive education and lived in one of the most glamorous sections of town. "Her dad?" Handing me the change, Stephen shook his head. "Nah, grandfather." I couldn't stop staring at her. "Aw, man, Jarrod, I know that look. Stay away from her. She's trouble." "What look?" "Just stay away from her," he repeated. "Dru's a witch or something." "A witch?" "Yeah." His odd gaze seemed to be zoning in on the angry old man. As his eyes narrowed, a large frown creased his face. How could he know so much about them if they just moved here? Sighing, I grabbed my drink. "A witch? Honestly, Stephen, you have issues, man." "I'm just saying," he yelled as I pulled open the door. "Stay away from him." I stepped onto the hot pavement, and I felt my heart break as her tears fell. Embarrassed or afraid? I couldn't tell. My heart just wanted to rescue her. "Get your ass in the truck," her grandfather ordered. "Yes, sir." Her soft words sounded more like wind chimes than a human voice. After pushing on the starter, I glanced over. She looked lost, sitting alone on the passenger side of that old truck. I backed out of the lot, wanting to pull her from his truck and protect her inside of mine. Someone that beautiful, that innocent-looking, should not be treated so harshly. I slowed down, waiting for them to catch up. As they passed, her eyes again glanced my way. My heart pounded. I raised my hand, and she turned away. Feeling stupid, I cringed. Had she even noticed me? Staying a car length behind, I followed. Our small town of Ridgeland, Mississippi didn't draw many visitors, and only a few students from my high school actually lived here in town. Most resided a few minutes down the expressway in Jackson. What our little town lacked, the larger one made up for. As the arrested truck passed under the major highway, my heart skipped. "Leaving town?" Nope, just turning down a country road where the old money lived. I laughed. Definitely not an area for the poor. After a couple of miles, the old man pulled into a driveway of a spacious home surrounded by a split-rail fence. To one side, fruit trees near a small pond decorated the yard. The man had money. Not wanting to draw attention to myself, I continued on. Her home didn't resemble anything a witch would live in. Then again, what did I know about witches? Nothing. Just as a year later, I knew nothing about how my exotic beauty, whom I loved so deeply, ended up dead on my boat dock. 2. Before death. The morning I first saw Dru, I had prayed that my life would change. I needed a change. To this very day, I still believe it was Dru who somehow mystically changed everything for me. Wasn't that what a witch did? Magically change things for people? I believe that now, and I always would. The night before I set the school's lab on fire, my dad had called to announce he'd be coming home after all. That meant Mom would clean herself up a little. If I were him, however, I'd never come home. Why he always returned was something I never understood. I needed to get myself moving. Cautiously, I opened the door and peeked into my parents' bedroom. Mom was naked on the floor with a towel in her right hand and an empty glass in the other. She definitely wasn't starting the day off in a good way. Did she even make it into the shower last night? I stepped over a yellow liquid that had soaked into the bright white carpet and knelt beside her. As my hand brushed against her cheek, I sighed. Still breathing, tossing a blanket over her nude body, I shook my head. I closed the door behind me and aimed for Marky's room. Sleeping soundly, he and Jippy, our little dog, looked way too peaceful to disturb. "Hey, Marky!" I shook his leg. "Time to get up." Marky moaned, and Jippy raised one eye to look at me. "No, really, kid, I can't be late. Come on, get up." Marky opened his eyes and frowned. "I'm too tired." "It's what you get for playing on your tablet all night. Now move." Marky was more of an afterthought, or maybe an oops. Never quite figured that one out. I was 9 when he joined our dysfunctional family. The fact that we were both born in May probably didn't help with our nasty disposition on life, either. We held hearts of gold, but tempers filled with rage. Rage against what? I wasn't sure. It was just something my grandmother Caldwell, my mom's mom, always said. Carbon copies of each other, we wore our dirty blonde hair parted on the same side, the left. We shared deep brown eyes and a guarded attitude toward our mother. If I had to, I could argue that I changed Marky's baby diapers more than she did. Then again, who'd debate such a thing? Now 8, and in the 3rd grade, Marky knew more about the world than anybody ever born. Just ask him. As for me, I loved him because he was Marky, my little brother. "I'll meet you downstairs," I said, stepping into the hallway. "Waffles with chocolate ice cream?" "Sure." The dishes stacked in the sink stunk. After glancing at the calendar, I felt a little relieved. Matilda should be here any minute. She cleaned every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Today was Friday, which was good because it seemed that my mother never cleaned a thing these days, including herself. I dropped a couple of frozen waffles into the toaster and clicked on the television. As SpongeBob sang out from the bottom of the sea, I started the coffee. Just as Marky sat down at the table, the front door closed and a fresh morning breeze drifted through the kitchen. "Hello!" Matilda's light-hearted voice was always a comforting sound. "In here." I pushed a rag across the counter, smearing a spilled liquid. Nothing I did would help with this mess. I gave up. "Hey, guys!" As always, Matilda kissed Marky on the forehead first. Then, as always, she gave me a strong hug. "How are my handsome boys today?" "We're alive." I pulled a paper plate from the shelf and cut the hot waffles into smaller pieces before dropping a heaping spoonful of ice cream into the middle. "Here, eat." I shoved the gooey mess in front of Marky, who smiled. "Thanks." Marky rubbed his eyes. "Matilda," I motioned her to the other room. Mom passed out again. She puked on the carpet this time. Matilda frowned. "Typical." I'm sorry, I would have cleaned it up, but I can't be late. No, no, she grinned. It's what your father pays me for. I'll get it. You two shouldn't have to see such things. And I'll let the dog in when he's finished outside. Yeah, well. Hey, Marky, you ready? Standing by the front door with his backpack in one hand and a half-eaten banana in the other, he looked a little more awake. Yeah. Did you brush your teeth? Opening his mouth, he slurred out the words as mushed banana breath hit me. Uh-huh. Of course you did. I waved, and Matilda smiled before waving back. Matilda worked for my family for as long as I could remember. Although she may be my mom's age, Matilda acted much older and wiser. Her family immigrated from Cuba, so she spoke with a slight accent. In many ways I often wished she were my mom. Her thick, dark hair that she wore in a soft bun, along with her dark complexion, gave our life a little color, especially next to our fair skin and blonde hair. Always ready with a warm hug or words of wisdom, Matilda filled in where my mom dropped off. I loved and appreciated her presence 3 days a week. Our home backed up to the Ross R. Barnett Reservoir, which meant we lived on a waterfront property. With a little over an acre, we were one of the lucky few. We were not tightly crammed between our neighbors. Lined heavily with trees, our long driveway could sometimes be a major pain. Other times it gave a person a chance to unwind before walking into the unknown. Coming home was always a crapshoot. One never knew what to expect. Mom would be fine one day and not the next. If not, it was best to avoid her if at all possible. Unless you wanted to be reminded that because of you, her life was ruined, just because you were born. I made the mistake once of telling her that she shouldn't have effed my father. Several stitches later, I accepted the fact that it was just safer to keep my mouth shut. Did I love my mom? Of course. She was my mom. If she died tomorrow, I'd cry. But after a few days, I'd piece my life back together and maybe, just maybe, be happy. My father might even stay home more if she were no longer around. Maybe. Can we go to a movie this weekend? Marky asked as I slowed to a stop in front of his school. I nodded. He smiled before adding, Great, love you, bro. Love you too, Squirt. I grinned as my truck door slammed shut. Glancing at the clock, I sighed. If I didn't hit any traffic and if people didn't run into each other, I just might make it to school on time. 15 minutes later, I was grabbing my book bag and heading to class. After entering calculus, I glanced around. Yesterday afternoon, Stephen had said her name was Dru and that she lived with her grandfather and that she was a witch. Well, I didn't see a broomstick in the corner, so she must be in another classroom, or she wasn't really a witch. It wasn't until literature that I again saw that angelic face, the face with the tender eyes that carried the weight of the world within their sparkling gaze. Sitting alone near the back of the classroom, Dru watched as the other students entered and found a seat. Hey, Jarrod, Jenny said, pounding on my arm. Coming over this weekend? Pool's still open, you know. Can't, I replied, still staring at Dru. Taking Marky to the movies. You'll miss a great party. Jenny tossed her bag under her desk. Little guy comes first. I dropped my bag next to my chair. Let's get started, Miss Ludi ordered from up front. Today I'm excited. Why? Because we have a new student. That's why. As soon as she said new student, my head jerked around. With her hair partly covering her face, Dru stared into her lap. My heart raced as my soul reached out to her. Almost as if she could read my mind, Dru lifted her gaze. As our eyes locked, I felt a surge of something smack me right between the eyes. Feeling my head lurch back, my eyes sprayed open. A small grin brightened her face. Everyone, this is Dru Palakiko. She's from Hawaii. Dru? Miss Ludi opened out her arms as if welcoming Dru to our classroom. When all eyes fell upon her, Dru slowly stood. Her curvy frame consumed me. She was wearing black leggings, a black t-shirt, and a colorful scarf draped over one shoulder before it wrapped around her waist. It created a sensual makeshift dress. Beaded sandals adorned her precious feet. One slender golden ring decorated a toe on her left foot. Damn if she weren't the prettiest thing I'd ever seen. Dru, can you tell us a little about Hawaii? Miss Ludi clapped her hands together. Since our small town didn't get many travelers, Miss Ludi seemed to be enjoying herself. Dru glanced around before saying anything. I lived in Kappa. Dru's voice was soft and tender. On the island of Kauai. My parents died last year. I'm living with my granddad now. Oh, Dru! Miss Ludi's eyes drooped as if she were about to cry. We're so sorry for your loss, sweetheart. Class, can we make Dru feel welcome? Several girls turned and reached out their hands. They whispered things I couldn't hear. Dru smiled. Although the school sucked, most of the students were pretty cool. Okay, Miss Ludi said after a short silence. Let's talk about literature, shall we? Dru, we're in the middle of Fahrenheit 451. Have you read it? Yes, Dru said. Last year. Great, then you shouldn't have any problems catching up. Miss Ludi turned back to the board and started talking to the wall. I hated it when she did that, made it hard to hear. As we discussed yesterday, Guy Montag was running from the authorities. After writing out a couple of words, she turned around. He found the exiled drifters led by a man named Granger. Throughout the duration of class, I couldn't help but steal a few peeks at Dru. Her mind definitely was not on literature. Her gaze remained glued to the windows. What was consuming her thoughts? Was she happy? Was she thinking about her parents? Did she hurt inside? Was there anything I could do to make her feel better? Jarrod, Miss Ludi's eyes landed on me. What's the meaning behind the destruction of the city? No longer staring at whatever was holding her interest, Dru's eyes now focused on me. Well, I said, gathering my thoughts, which wasn't easy with that beauty sitting behind me. Maybe Bradbury was trying to tell us that from destruction comes a rebirth, a renewal of the inner spirit. I thought about Dru losing her parents. Damn, that had to have hurt. Even if everything you have is gone and there's nothing left, you can still have hope, and from hope you can rebuild. How could Dru rebuild her life? Maybe I could help her to heal, but how could I do that? Miss Ludi smiled. Very good, Jarrod. Yes, class. Phew. The teach bought it. Again, I glanced over my shoulder. This time, Dru grinned when our eyes met. I couldn't help but smile back. Without realizing it, I also winked. Dru frowned and stared out the window. My mind played through what just happened, and I wanted to slap myself. I could apologize after class. I could ask for her phone number, or I could be polite and just leave her the F alone. The bell rang, and the sound of scuffling shoes and chairs filled the room. Just before I reached the classroom door, I glanced back at Dru. She was still staring out those damn windows. Giving her space, I aimed for my next class, creative art, one of the courses we students used as an excuse to not do anything. Every month our instructor assigned us a special project. Made from everyday items, it was up to us to create that one perfect piece of art. Last month I fashioned a robot out of old garage fodder. Using bicycle parts and mismatched junk, my creation was so wonderful that the instructor submitted it for a national award. Of course, we wouldn't know the results until the end of the school year, but just his declaration of approval was enough of an award for me. Tossing my bag into one of the cubicles, I glanced around the room. Several tall tables, each with 4 stools, took up most of the space. Shelves filled with art supplies lined the walls, and one lone desk near the back belonged to the teacher. I sat down at my assigned table, and my heart stopped as she walked in. Watching her talk to the instructor, I had to remind myself to breathe. In this class, we sat 4 to a table, except for my group. There were only the 2 of us. My partner, Kelly Jo, was actually a pretty cool partner. She did her thing, and I did mine. We seemed to like it that way. I'm going to place you with these 2, Mr. Meidel said, escorting Dru to our table. You can leave your bags in the cubbies over there. We're a pretty trusting group. No one will bother your things. This looking guy here is Jarrod, and this pretty young girl here is Kelly Jo. Folks, this is Dru." I nodded. "Hi, Dru," Kelly Jo said. "We really need another member." "This one here," Kelly Jo pointed at me, "hardly ever says a word. I'm always on my own." Dru smiled. Again, I melted. "This is a great time for you to start," Mr. Meidel stated. "Today I'm assigning a new project." As Mr. Meidel passed out the assignment sheet, I couldn't stop staring at Dru. Her large eyes followed the instructor as he walked around the room. To me, she resembled a lost puppy, making me want to take her by the hand and help her find her home. For some strange reason, I felt protective over her, similar to how I felt towards Marky. Such a peculiar sensation. "You'll need to go for long walks this weekend," Mr. Meidel said. "Collect all the discarded bottles you can find." "Bottles?" A girl from another table whispered. "Old bottles," he said. "Colorful bottles, anything that's made of glass, no plastic." "Too bad we can't steal from the dump," a boy said. "Dumps won't allow you to take anything away," Kelly Jo explained. "I can walk the park this week and see what I can find." "Yeah," another girl said. "Old whiskey or wine bottles." The class laughed. "Walk wherever you want," Mr. Meidel said. "You'll need to collect between 10 to 20 bottles each. Bring them in clean, no bugs or dirt, please." "Ew!" A high-pitched squeal echoed through the room. "It'll be fine," Mr. Meidel added. "Every year my students collect bottles for this assignment." "There's probably none left," I whispered. Dru giggled. "All right, then," Mr. Meidel shook his head. After class, Dru went her way, and I went mine. Not having the chance to set the chem lab on fire was a blessing. Instead of experimenting, we were given a written test. Maybe Mr. Anderson thought it was safer that way. To my bewilderment, he never mentioned the detention or my kind words again. Perhaps the principal talked him out of it. Who knows? I wasn't about to ask. However, as I left the classroom, Mr. Anderson stood next to another teacher in the hallway. Their conversation immediately grabbed my attention. "What proof do you have?" the other teacher asked. "Paraphernalia from the girls' room," Mr. Anderson whispered as his eyes scanned through the students. "Had a few photos taken. It's pretty clear we have a new one in town. Just like rodents sneak in when we're not on guard." Mr. Anderson's face looked pale. Something was really bothering him. He actually looked afraid. Not knowing who they were referring to, I darted into the school's courtyard. My hopes soared when I saw Dru standing next to my truck, smiling. Is she waiting for me? How can I be so lucky? Jogging toward the parking lot, I almost tripped over my own clumsy feet as her grandfather pulled his ancient truck right in next to mine. I was starting to hate that vehicle of his. As she climbed in, our gaze touched for only a few seconds before she was again gone. I stood stunned and felt stupid as a slight hint of jasmine filled the air. Dru? Did Dru leave a little portion of herself behind? Was it for me? Or was it just my damn imagination?